Hi, I'm Trey Knowles. I hope you guys got a chance to watch my comedy special, The Papacy Psychosis. You're probably wondering, is there really a psychosis? I want you guys to make that decision. So I want you guys to watch The Papacy Prostitute Beast. Check this out, The Papacy Prostitute Beast. And you decide, was there really a psychosis in my comedy, The Papacy Psychosis? Check this out, The Papacy Prostitute Beast.
So this morning, the Council for Inclusive Capitalism announcing a new partnership between the Pope, the Vatican, and business leaders across the globe. It follows a meeting just over a year ago in which the Pope Francis called for the urgent need for an economic system that is fair, trustworthy, and capable of addressing the most profound challenges facing humanity. Executives are now committing to the Council's pledge to create a more sustainable and equitable system. They include Bank of America CEO Brian Moynihan, Johnson & Johnson CEO Alex Gorsky, CalPERS CEO Marcy Frost, and Merck CEO Ken Frazier. And joining us right now is the founder of that council, Lynn Forster de Rothschild. Lynn, good morning to you. You are the brainchild of this idea, and I'm curious if you could even just tell us how you convinced the Vatican and the Pope to embrace capitalism. I went back and I've looked at some of the encyclicals, as you know. 5 years ago, the Pope said that capitalism was the dung of the devil. What did you do to get the Vatican on board?
Well, the Vatican has asked for concrete actions to benefit all people. And in his encyclical in 2020, the Fratelli Tutti, he talked about reconciling the world of finance and the world of work. And that is what we are doing. Pope Francis doesn't point an accusatory finger at wealth creation and capitalism, but what he wants is for the creation of wealth to aid and not destroy the planet and the people on it. So we are responding to his call to reform capitalism, to make it inclusive, to make it sustainable, to make it trusted as well as dynamic.
So, there are people who will invariably be skeptical of, and there are skeptics of the ESG movement. I would argue this is another step in the direction of the ESG movement. But what does this partnership look like, and what do these pledges by companies look like?
So that's a great question, Andrew, and we understand the skepticism, and we are not another group of people who meet once and are done. We have 230 specific commitments that our guardians have made to inclusive capitalism that are on our website today at inclusivecapitalism.com. But more importantly than what our 23 guardians are committing to is the fact that we are asking all businesses, large and small, to go to the website, agree to our principles, and then make their own commitments. We're not prescriptive in terms of what is inclusive capitalism, but what we do believe is that it's important, if we're going to have true system change, for everyone to do what they can, to think about what the Holy Father said in the Laudato Si in 2015 when he asked us to listen to the cry of the earth and the cry of the poor. That's not a religious imperative, that's a moral imperative.
So here's a philosophical question for you.
Okay.
The philosophical question is, in the world of business and the world of capitalism, there are going to be times, for example, where your company might be struggling and you might have to debate whether you are going to lay off workers or not pay out a dividend, for example. There are going to be times where there's going to be questions about whether you should have a philanthropic arm or you shouldn't. Is this supposed to be philanthropy? How should business leaders think about this?
No, this is not philanthropy at all. What it is it's business putting profit in service of people and planet, but not taking away profit. there is no indication from the Holy Father that there should not be wealth creation. And in fact, in the document called Journeying Toward Our Common Home, it specifically talks about wealth creation that helps the planet, helps the world rather than hurts it. So of course there are balances, and that's why we have boards, and that's why we have managements, and that's why we want accountability. In the council, we have asset owners and asset managers who are making commitments to hold companies to account, not for a specific end goal of what they should do in the specific situation of their company, particularly if it's in any kind of distress, but how is the company responding to all of its stakeholders?
Religion can be an incredibly profitable business if done right. And there's no better example of this than the Vatican, the world's smallest sovereign nation. At just 0.27 square kilometers, it is home to the wealthiest religion on the planet, the Catholic Church. For decades, the Catholic Church has been haunted by scandal after scandal after scandal. With more than 1.3 billion members worldwide, it is the second biggest religion in the world. And this entire empire of vast, unimaginable wealth is based off of your donations. But the Catholic Church is clever. If people knew just how wealthy they are, no one would continue donating to them. That's why they keep all their true finances very close to their chest, careful to not let the public ever peer into the true financial state of the church. That's why in 2021, the Catholic Church is whining that apparently they're low on reserves, running a deficit, and are in desperate need of your donations. When in Australia alone, they're worth at least $30 billion. That's more than what Starbucks is worth around the world. And thanks to some simple math, we can get a rough estimate of how much wealth the Catholic Church really has. So the Catholic Church is worth around $30 billion in Australia. There's around 5.5 million Catholics in Australia. That means the Catholic Church is able to extract an average of around $5,454 per user. There are 372 million Catholics in Europe, the US, Canada, and Australia combined. So, $5,454 per Catholic times 372 million Catholics means that the Catholic Church has a little over $2 trillion in wealth. And that's just from the main Western countries. That means the Catholic Church is in the same league as companies you know and love, like Apple, Microsoft, the Saudi Arabian oil company, Amazon, and Alphabet. Let's say on that $2 trillion, they're able to get a conservative return of 3%. For context, the stock market typically returns 10%. $2 trillion at just 3% gives them $60 billion every single year. Tax-free, theoretically of course. But what do they tell the public? That in 2018, apparently they only profited a measly $20 million, nowhere near even $1 billion. And at the center of all of this is the Vatican Bank, God's bankers. Today, it's probably better to think of the Vatican as a combination of the Federal Reserve, an offshore bank, and a hedge fund, compared to just being the headquarters of Catholicism. The Vatican is the ultimate corporation that has stood the test of time like no other, and this is how it's done. Centuries before the Catholic Church became a capitalist holding company, the Vatican was a secular empire, meaning that its existence wasn't directly connected to Catholicism as it is today. The popes were the kings of the Vatican, and they also acted as the supreme leaders of the Roman Church in Italy. Popes believed that God had chosen them to reign over all the other leaders of the world. During the time of the Pope Kings, the Vatican controlled over 15,000 square miles of land in Italy, called the Papal States, vastly bigger than the tiny area the Vatican City occupies today. All this land was important because building palaces and running one of the most luxurious courts in Europe was expensive. And what better way to continue your life of luxury than by taxing the people you rule over? Just like the corrupt governments of today, people's taxes in the 6th and 7th century went to maintaining the lifestyles of the Pope Kings and their sidekicks, also known as the cardinals. Over time, the taxes just weren't enough for the lavish lifestyle the guys in charge had come to expect. But there was a problem. The Pope was already taxing the Papal States, charging fees to trade and do business, selling most of the region's agricultural products, and none of it was enough. he needed a new way to make money fast. Around the 6th century, the Vatican leadership suddenly had a brilliant plan. They were already selling most of the Papal State's natural resources to make money, but there were only so many grapes or vegetables to export. But what if the Pope and his cardinals had something to sell that was incredibly valuable and would never run out? They would be able to make infinite amounts of money. So the plan was simple. Since the Pope was God's representative on earth, and he had thousands of members in his church, what if he could sell them a way to reduce the amount of punishment they would receive for their sins? After all, years of penance and fear of purgatory had made people terrified of God's wrath. So paying just a little bit of extra money so they wouldn't burn in hell as long was a very good deal. So the church started selling indulgences. Little tickets that promised God wouldn't punish them too much for whatever they did wrong. Small sins were cheaper to get indulgences for, while bigger sins were obviously more expensive. Even though it wasn't the original plan, indulgences became people's get-out-of-jail-free cards, except they actually had to pay for them. It was a cash cow unlike anything the Vatican had ever seen before. Sure, hundreds of church officials were abusing their right to sell indulgences, but with millions flowing into the church treasury, who was the Pope to complain? After all, the prosperity of the church was God's will. The sale of indulgences went on for more than 1,000 years. During this time, the church and the Pope got wealthier and wealthier. But then, starting with the 1789 French Revolution, things started to go downhill. First, Napoleon demanded millions in tribute from the Vatican each year. Then other leaders of Europe started taxing the Vatican's money as well. The Pope called taxing the Vatican the work of the devil. But it didn't change the fact that the endless streams of money the Pope had been enjoying were quickly drying up. Something had to be done. With European states asking the Vatican for more and more money, taxes on the Papal States kept going up. And like any 19th century state with corrupt leaders and climbing taxes, the people rebelled. In 1848, crowds stormed the Vatican City and murdered the Papal Prime Minister. The people of the Papal States were tired of being treated as a cash reserve, and the Vatican went into massive debt. It was 2 years behind on bills, taxes were almost non-existent, and even the sale of indulgences had nosedived. The Pope in charge had tried appealing to the masses, allowing more freedom of speech, and releasing more than 1,000 political prisoners, but it was too little too late. Desperate to keep the Vatican and the church going, the Pope had a difficult decision to make. He would go to the Rothschilds for help. Yes, those Rothschilds. Being a Jewish family business, the Pope had to swallow a lot of pride to get into their debts, but his lifestyle and wealth was more important than his pride. So the Rothschilds lent the Vatican 50 million francs, around $10 million, to cover the Vatican's budget for an entire year. But then in 1870, the Italians invaded Rome and brought an end to the Vatican's control of the Papal States. Even making deals with heathens couldn't save the Vatican from financial ruin. The 15,000 square miles the Vatican controlled was reduced to 0.17. The thousands of subjects the Vatican could tax had fallen to around 700 people who lived at the court. The massive papal empire had fallen and became what we now know today as the Vatican City.
Forever.
Around 60 Italian families stayed loyal to the Pope. They were known as the Black Nobles. The Vatican was at a crossroads, and this led to the first ever Catholic investments into secular businesses. The Pope started investing money into Roman real estate, and luckily, he caught the front end of the real estate boom. And for a while, his investments were a big success. Most of the Black nobles just followed the church's example and invested in the same properties as the Pope did, and they got rich too. But then in 1887, the property market crashed, and the Vatican was back to square one, looking for a new way to make money. So the church started asking for donations, or Peter's Pence as they called it. They were in the important business of saving souls. And if regular Catholic Church members wanted to get in on the salvation, all they had to do was donate some money to the church. And the church was back in business, and started investing more than ever into secular businesses. And then, just like most of the major global corporations we talked about before, the world wars came along. And the church saw an opportunity to profit like never before.
But I was never a true banker. Mea culpa.
Just as World War I broke out, a new pope took control of the Vatican. donations plummeted, and so did the Vatican's income, again. And for a while, the new pope tried to get Italy to stay neutral in the war, hoping that it would keep their investments in Italy safe. But in 1915, the Italians declared war on Germany and joined the Allies, leaving the pope desperately looking for a way to keep his revenues up. So, the Vatican rented one of its properties in Rome to an arms manufacturer that sold to Germany. Yes, the Vatican was indirectly making money selling weapons of war to the other side of the war. When the public eventually found out about the arms dealing, the church said it was in complete shock and never knew about what its tenant was doing. But it was all in vain because by 1933, the Vatican was losing around 100 million lira a year. Desperate not to go under, the Pope finally gave in and got a real financial advisor, who helped keep the Vatican out of the gutters by making a lot of diverse investments. And the most profitable time in Vatican history was only just starting. When World War II hit, instead of staying out of politics and focusing on religion, like he did in World War I, the Pope went all in and took the German side. The Vatican had become friendly with the fascist leader of Italy, Mussolini, and Germany seemed to be a similar choice. And in exchange for their support, the Third Reich would deduct 8 to 10% of Catholic Germans' wages to be sent directly to the Vatican. The Third Reich was taxing Catholics on the Vatican's behalf. The church usually had trouble getting people to pay on their own free will, so automatically taking 10% of all Catholics in Germany's monthly wage did a lot to boost the Vatican economy. The Germans and the Vaticans got so friendly that when the sitting pope died, there were rumors that Hitler could pay 3 million gold Reichmarks, or $12.6 million at the time, and pick whoever he wanted to be the next pope. The new pope, although actually not picked by Hitler, seemed happy to keep a good relationship with Germany, and even held a grand reception for Hitler's 50th birthday. Money was once again flowing into the Vatican City, but there was a new problem. All the Vatican's transactions and money was kept in Western banks in Europe, which meant that most of it could be traced or even frozen. And it wouldn't be long before the Allies found out just how much of the church's money was coming from Germany, which would mean instant blacklisting. So the Pope's financial advisor came up with a new plan: build a bank in the Vatican. After all, the Vatican is its own country, so why shouldn't it have a national bank? So this bank with this long name, or IOR, was born. It only had one branch, inside the Vatican City, and it wasn't on anyone's blacklist, which meant it was free from wartime regulations. The new Vatican Bank could operate anywhere in the world without showing profits, annual reports, balance sheets, or where its money came from. And it only had one shareholder, the Pope. Now the Vatican could take money from whoever they wanted, deposit it into their own bank, and never leave a single paper trail behind. And it didn't take people long to see how the Vatican Bank could be useful to them. From all over Europe, rich Italians were now depositing their money into the Vatican Bank by sending an employee over the street with a suitcase full of cash. But it wasn't only the Italians. Eventually, the OSS, which was the precursor to the CIA, found out that even Hitler was making regular deposits into the Vatican Bank using a Swiss bank as a middleman. Out of all the clever business moves we've seen on this channel, this has got to be one of my favorites. Near the end of World War II, the Vatican was so deep in bed with the Germans, they would even take money from the life insurance policies of Jews that were sent to camps. When the families came asking for the money they rightfully deserved, the insurance companies would ask to see a death certificate they knew no one could actually get. So they kept the money and, you guessed it, deposited that money into the Vatican Bank. And it wasn't just the Germans. In the days of the Italian Mafia, anyone with drug money, racketeering money, or any other illegal funds could deposit their cash at the Vatican Bank and know it can never be traced and their deposits never made public. The Vatican Bank became known as the place to launder or hide your money, and with all that notorious reputation came a lot of government attention. But instead of closing down the bank for its illegal or unethical activities, the Italian government thought they could profit too, and decided that all the regional banks owned by the Vatican would have to start paying tax. By the mid-50s, the church had 600 million members and depended on donations for most of its money and investments. So when a report came out that the Vatican had $13 billion in liquid investments, the Pope quickly corrected them, saying that it was probably closer to 500 million, less than 4% of the estimate. But soon the church would run into more trouble with donations, but it wouldn't be because of people finding out just how much money they had. Around the late 20th century, reports started going around about how priests abused children. I'm sure you've seen at least one of these stories in the news. Obviously, the idea that the priesthood, the people who were supposed to be the leaders of the churches, were hurting kids was bad news for donations. The Vatican had to do everything in its power to keep people quiet. If the church admitted to knowing about the abuse, it would be the end of them. So by January 2002, the Catholic Church had already paid out around $175 million in settlements to families from Australia to Europe. Instead of apologizing, the Pope made excuses, which meant even more lawsuits were filed and even more money was paid out. By 2014, that $175 million in settlements had turned into more than $3 billion. Donations dropped, but as usual, the Vatican had a plan.